Sometimes you want cake. Sometimes you want bourbon. Today, I'm making a Betty Crocker bourbon. How's it going, chasers? I hope you're having a kick-ass week. I'm Jesse, this is Still It, and these are my newly made Betty Crocker bourbon jars. They've only just started aging, and honestly, I think there's actually kind of something to this more than just a cheap gimmick. But we'll get onto that later on when I actually get to the tasting part. Right now, I think it only makes sense for me to show you how I made it, right? We're making bourbon. So that means we need corn, right? I should say bourbon because obviously this isn't actually a bourbon. Distilled specialty, I guess. Anyway, we're using malted corn today, and I'm going to be using 6 kilos of it. Sorry, I used it all up before I got B-roll of it. But it's this stuff here. 6 kilos of the stuff, and the reason I'm using malted corn is because you don't need to gelatinize it. You don't need to cook it. The job's already been done for you. But just because it's been malted doesn't mean it has enough enzymes to convert the starch into sugar, and that's kind of the case with corn. So enter Pilsner malt. I'm using Pilsner malt today because I felt like it. This stuff has all the enzymes we're going to need to convert all of the starch absolutely everywhere. And I'm going to be using 5 kilos of this stuff. Oh, by the way, if you didn't notice, guys, there's freedom units popping up all over the place for those of you that are imperially inclined. Then, of course, there is the subject of the cake. This is going to be a Betty Crocker bourbon, strawberry edition. Aren't these the most lovely cakes you've ever seen? Don't say it. Don't say it. You'll regret it later, I promise you. They are beautiful, all right? And I always forget to mention it, so I'm going to say it today. Remember, this stuff's got to be milled. If you don't have a mill, the homebrew shop will mill it for you. This is what mine looked like right before mashing in. Speaking of which, let's mash in. Mashing, simply put, is putting starch into a liquid at a specific temperature to promote certain enzymes to convert the starch into sugar in a way that we want. We want it in a form that's going to be easily digestible for our yeast. And guess what, guys? I've got some new equipment for mashing. I thought it seemed fitting to do something weird for its maiden voyage. Give me 5 or 6 brews with it, and then I'm happy to give you guys a rundown on what I think of it. We'll leave that until then, though, all right? I brought 35 litres of water up to 65 degrees Celsius, which is my mash temperature. Generally, I would use a strike temperature, have it hotter, and then the thermal mass of the grains, when they go in, pull the temperature down to the temperature you want. But because this has the ability to recirculate the wort and keep it at a temperature that you decide on, I figured I'd let it do its thing and see what happens. So I mashed in nice and slowly, stirring a little bit of grain in, adding a little bit of grain, giving it a stir. You get the idea, until we had a fairly moderately thick mash. Then I just let the equipment bring the mash back up to 65 degrees Celsius, which, to be honest, it did a really good job of, and let it mash for 35 minutes, which gave me plenty of time to get my beautiful cake ready. Yeah, I bet you feel real stink now, don't you? Like I said, absolutely beautiful cakes, right? We did have a bit of an issue in terms of deciding whose cake got to be eaten and whose cake had to be sacrificed for data drink. So in the end, I had to split it down the middle, and we did half and half each way. So I gave it a little bit of a smash up and then let it do its thing and mash away for 1 hour. Let's just say you want to be able to access certain information on the internet. Maybe it's about a certain hobby you have. Let's also say that you just think it's absolutely no one else's business what you're looking at. Or perhaps the internet gods just don't really want you to have that information. Enter the sponsor of today's video, NordVPN. NordVPN is a virtual private network that acts as a buffer between you and the content you're trying to access on the internet. That allows you to fool whatever you're trying to access into thinking you're actually in a completely different geographic location. Content not available where you are? Not a problem. Nord opens you up to a truly worldwide internet experience. Even better, one account gives you this convenience on up to 6 different devices. So if you are into easy, fast, convenient VPN protection, NordVPN has a special link in the description down below for you. Get a huge discount on a 2-year plan of NordVPN at nordvpn.com/stillit and get yourself a month free as well. Thanks, NordVPN. Then it was time to lift the basket up and drain the wort out of the bottom for our first runnings. Now, like I said, this was a fairly thick mash, so I sparged heavily. And I just kept going until I hit 1.065 on the refractometer, and that gave me roughly, I'm guessing random numbers, 38 to 45 liters. Sparging, if you're not sure, is the act of kind of washing out all of the sugar that's left stuck in the grains. Imagine a sponge, you pour a sugar syrup over the top of it, and then you let it drain out the bottom. There's going to be a buttload of sugar still in that sponge. So just tipping water over the top and letting it trickle through helps you make use of all that sugar that you've worked so hard to create already. After a thoroughly good thrashing with a paint mixer and an electric drill, just to make sure that there's enough O2 in the mix to keep our yeasty friends happy, I pitched AM1 yeast, and 24 hours later, it was humming along happily. After 7 days of fermentation, it had fermented out down to 1.005 gravity reading on the hydrometer. Sorry guys, I know this is a horrible angle for you to see, but trust me. Obviously, there was the option here to do the double distillation thing, a double pot run, stripping run, spirit run. But because it was a relatively small wash and I could fit the whole thing into the still, I decided instead to run it with 2 plates. Now, reminder to not leave your still unattended. I walked away for 5 minutes and this started happening. Luckily, I got to the power switch quickly and shut it all down before it actually puked. Not that it would have been a huge problem. But I'm pleased to say after that, the run went quite smoothly. I took fours and heads off quite slowly. And I did have one jar where I wasn't quite sure whether it was heads or hearts, but to be honest, the transition did happen pretty quickly. And then after that, I was able to collect a little over 2 liters of hearts. Spoiler alert, that jar, I decided not to keep it. I proofed the hearts down to 55% and popped them into 2 different jars. Each jar is going to get a slightly different treatment when it comes to wood and maturation, but that is a story for a little bit later on. Time for tasting, but first, a huge thank you to the Patreons. Thank you so much, Patreons. I love your work. I love your support. I love being able to interact with you and get ideas off you, so thanks, guys. I thoroughly appreciate it. So back to the tasting, and why I think this is not entirely just a silly gimmick. It is, but what I'm saying is the results are kind of cool. It tastes like you would expect a bourbon to taste at this point in time. It's a white spirit that's intended for aging. It's got a little bit of grunge on the back end. It's got a little bit spiky and jaggy up front. Over time, those are going to turn into beautiful things. There's corn flavor, there's grain flavor, there's a corny sweet flavor, and it has a nice velvety, luxurious sort of feeling on the tongue, which I get from a lot of corn spirits at this point in time compared to others. It's not oily, but it's heading that way and it's quite nice for a white spirit at this point in time. But it has an underlying strawberry sweetness. Now that Betty Crocker cake is chocked full of weird artificial, like, I don't know, roses, strawberry kind of flavor. You don't get those in America. I don't know, like strawberry candy, I guess. But the funny thing is that distillation has made it actually taste slightly more like strawberry than the weird candy strawberry thing. And it's subtle, guys. This is not a strawberry drink that tastes a little bit like bourbon. It's very much the other way. I think you'd be able to detect that there's something else in there, or you'd think it's odd for a bourbon at this point in time, at the very least. The other thing that is showing up that I didn't really anticipate is this really interesting, soft, confectionery sweetness. Both the mouthfeel and the flavor of the icing seem to have come through a little bit as well, which I wasn't expecting. I didn't think that would happen. That's kind of fun. So with all of that considered, I couldn't decide exactly what to do with wood, so I split it into 2 batches, and I've done 2 things. Spoiler alert, the wood did go in here about 3 days ago, so it's starting to get a little bit of color. I'm not sure if you can see that on camera or not, but the flavor is completely negligible at this point in time. Anyway, this jar got a piece of oak that had been toasted in the oven at 320 degrees Fahrenheit. Hey, I did one. I said it instead of pointing, which is 160 degrees Celsius for 45 minutes. And then I gave it a light char on 3 sides with a blowtorch. So just like a level 1 char, quite restrained. And the idea here is that I'm hoping to keep the oak influence complementary and similar to the confectionery and strawberry sweetnesses. I'm hoping to kind of double down on that in this jar. On this side, however, I used a piece of oak that had been toasted much hotter, much faster. It was only 10 minutes per side at 180 degrees Celsius in a skillet. And then I gave it a 1, 2, 3 level char on 3 of the sides. So the first side was the same as this. The second one was a little bit heavier. The third was even heavier. And I left one of the sides just toasted. The idea here is to see if we can get some more of the toasted almond, barrel spice pushing towards pepper to kind of juxtapose and push against the strawberry sweetness. Oftentimes, opposite flavors work well together. Chili and chocolate, for example. Wildly different, gangbusters together. So there we have it. Betty Crocker Bourbon, strawberry edition. I might try another one. Chocolate cake seemed like the obvious choice. That's why I didn't do it. But if you guys are keen to see it, maybe it'll come back at some point in time. Maybe what I should do is wait and see if this turns out well. And if it doesn't, it'll just quietly go off into the distance. Any case, guys, I'm guessing that no one out there has done something similar to this. If you have, you're my hero and you need to tell me about it. If you haven't, let me know what you think and let me know which of these two woods you think is going to work best, and most importantly, why. I don't know the answer to that. We can find out together. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, please guys, hit the like button down below, subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, and I'll catch you next time. Keep on chasing the craft. See ya.